Feudalism is going to be the new type of government that comes to Western Europe after the fall of Rome. And with feudalism, there is a new social structure that forms. At the very top of this social structure is going to be the king, who would own all the land within his country. He's going to be the one that makes up the laws and decides what should be done throughout his kingdom. The king did not have enough currency to pay his workers, so what he would do is he would give large plots of land away instead. So these large plots of land would be given to the next level in the social class, which is considered the lords and nobles. So they are right below the king. So the lords and nobles would watch over the land that was given to them by the king. On their land, they would have possibly knights that lived there. They also would have peasants that lived there. The lords and nobles would also give away some of their land to knights. And in return, these knights would fight for the nobles and the king. That way, the king would not have to pay them with currency. He would pay the soldiers that fought for him with land. Below the knights would be the peasants, also known as the serfs. These are the lowest people on the social class in feudalism. They are going to be the ones that worked the land for the king, the nobles, and the knights. And in return, they would receive protection from all three levels above them. They weren't slaves, but they were pretty close to it. They weren't allowed to leave the land that they lived on. Generations of families would continue to stay in the same area because they weren't allowed to leave. They couldn't marry outside of their social class. They could only marry another peasant. And if they did want to get married, they would need to ask the lord of their village for permission to do this. So this image shows what one of these villages would have looked like. So this would have been a piece of land or a fief that was given to a lord from a king. And the lord would build a large house. Usually it was called the manor house. This is where he would live. He would possibly own other villages as well. The lord would be responsible for governing whatever land was given to him by the king, because the king wasn't able to govern all of his land. So he put the lords in charge of this. On his land, the lord would have peasants. I already mentioned this. And they would be responsible for growing the food. They would make clothes for everyone. And they would take care of the lord's manor. And in return, they would receive protection. So on this image, you see the manor house. You see lots of little homes with hay roofs. These would be where the peasants would live. Peasants really had a rough life. These homes are not pleasant at all. They would have dirt floors. They had hay for roofs, so think about that when it rains. They would be one-room houses, so it was not the best living conditions for them, but they did receive protection from outside forces. And feudalism was pretty effective for what was needed at the time period. There were several invasions that would take place from new enemies, and so by having castles built and knights protecting these different villages, it helped to protect everyone. And in a feudal society, though, there was no effective central government, and there was always a constant threat of famine, disease, and warfare. And as a result, people that are living during this time, they really needed to have a strong lord. And even though the lord was a dominant figure, feudalism depended on mutual trust and responsibility. Both the lord and the peasants had to be sure that the other would back them up if it was needed. The lord was responsible for protecting his people. The serfs provided him with food and clothing, and the knights needed to come to the lord's aid when they were called upon. Feudalism was not perfect at all. It did provide some stability at the time. Feudalism was also flexible. There wasn't a rule book on how it should be run. And depending on what was happening at the time, the arrangement between the lords and knights and peasants could change if it was needed. Peasant life, I had already mentioned, was not great, but the Lord did understand that without the peasants, he would not be able to exist either. So everyone really relies on each other in this type of government.